It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. We had everything before us. We had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven. We were all going direct the other way. In short, the period was so far like the present period that some of its noisiest authorities insisted on its being received for good or for evil in the superlative degree of comparison only. These were the opening words of one of the greatest novels in a rich history for a nation from which this nation had separated from a tyrannical rule and violent revolution over 2 centuries ago. But because of a shared common heritage, it was this great work that formed the framework for the address to the Democrat National Committee that Mario Cuomo, the former governor of the state of New York, had found his inspiration when he accepted that political party's nomination during their national nomination convention, as he compared the lives of Americans at his time to a tale of 2 cities, in direct contrast to an image of an America that had been presented by his political opponent, Ronald Reagan, who had in turn, like a former president and Roman Catholic John F. Kennedy, had borrowed also from a Protestant minister of his Commonwealth's past so many years before when he had ascended to the office of the presidency, speaking of a city, a shining city, atop a hill. And I believe that these vignettes regarding the many men we have chosen to lead both our individual states as well as our nation underline a character and the fact that despite our many differences, we remain all interconnected by a common experience that has and always will define our common character in a patchwork quilt or a fabric of freedom we like so often to call in this land of America. As one Virginian said, truly, a land without memories is a people without liberty. In the American experience, we all share. The Commonwealth has played a prominent role from the very beginning of this nation. As the native home of many of our most illustrious founding fathers, one of whom wrote our very Declaration of Independence, and one of whom served as our nation's very first president, after leading this nation through a truly revolutionary war to begin an experiment in democracy like no other nation before had experienced, and even today, the place that was to be his trip and permanent resting place is marked by a star beneath the rotunda in the building where recent tragic events have fired even more bitter political divisions. And it is his statue, image that remains, at least today, one of the only 2 remaining representatives of this Commonwealth, often called the cradle of the presidency in the National Statuary Hall. Only one of 35 to grace that venerated place of honor for our nation, while the statue of another Virginian of our complicated history found its removal from that strip space below the rotunda only just a few short weeks ago. My name is Major Mike Webb, and I am a candidate for governor of Virginia. But for what I am about to say, neither of those facts are of particular relevance. I am a retired military officer, the 3rd generation of military officers in my family, as well as the 3rd generation of my family who was a college graduate. And I am the 3rd generation of my family since slavery to be an American citizen. And for what I'm about to say, the only facts that are of any particular importance is the fact that I am an American. an American who took a solemn oath in October 1991 to serve this nation in support of and defending its Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. An oath I took freely, without mental reservation nor purpose of evasion, and as a retired military officer until such time as I submit a declaration to the United States Congress or die that I wish to relinquish that title and its attendant obligations. I shall remain obligated to those very same responsibilities for which I pledged to serve this nation so long ago. One Virginian from the nation's history whose name today is the subject of a great controversy, but who had certainly considered the consequences of unpopular choices that a true leader may often be compelled to make in that loneliness of command that is called true leadership, once said that true patriotism sometimes requires of men to act exactly contrary at one period to that which it does at another. And the motive which impels them, the desire to do right, is precisely the same. A very, very complicated thing, which is leadership, which requires men of great character to make those decisions. The last few days have been a trying time for this nation, and perhaps the temporal immediacy of those trials create a sense of urgency that excites many to excited passions and ulterior motives. But we all must have courage as Americans, and it is our duty as Americans to do so. And we are buttressed in our faith by the historical fact that this is not the first time, nor the last time that this nation in over 2 centuries of existence thus far has presented upon itself divisive issues that have tested whether that nation, created of the people, by the people, and for the people, might long endure and not perish from the earth. But as always has been so, the consequences and repercussions of our actions in the present moment, the present necessity in choosing how we proceed forward, making the next steps, will have an enormous impact upon how we are viewed by our friends and our allies, as well as our enemies throughout the world, and how we are even able to look at ourselves, our virtues and our character, and those of this nation, which will have enormous impacts on the lives of others for years to come. These small steps for us are indeed small steps for mankind. The emergence of a novel coronavirus in a nation not particularly amicable to this nation over a year ago have presented great challenges for us all, each and every one of us, to overcome, and brought great changes to an American way of life to which we had formerly become accustomed. But there are certain things, perhaps we can describe them as values, that form our very genetic structure and define what it means for us, one and all, to be American. And any mutation from that genetic sequence forever alters this unique species amongst the families of governmental forms around the world. And over the past year, just as a virus, a single strand of RNA met with evolutionary pressures, can, through a natural selection, choose those things that best ensure its survival and virulence and lethality, may also find an impact in natural selection upon the host to which it attaches, with lethal consequences to one, the other, or both. But as we move forward together, arm in arm, singing "We Shall Overcome," or 6 feet apart in observance of a pandemic crisis, to another transition of power, whether it's a triumphant Democrat, a disappointed Republican, a nonpartisan independent, or an ambivalent citizen, this positive inquiry yet remains as to how do we keep its music playing? How do we make it last? For certainly our faith and many of our institutions and even our various religions have been put to a demanding test. and most at least agree in principle that the standard that will best ensure our mutual survival is reliance on those decisions based in reasoned and empirical facts, upon which the disciplines of science most promote for our advance. So let us now turn to the indisputable facts. Whether you are conservative or progressive, or Democrat or Republican, our Constitution prescribes for our disputes and controversies a rule of law. And under this common law, we are all, at least in our courts, viewed as equal, one against another, not treated in disparate treatment from any other similarly situated persons. For in America, as recently stated by Congressman Don Beyer during the last impeachment crisis, we have no kings in a land called America. We are all subject to one law. But it remains an empirical and jurisprudential fact that no one can deny that since at least April 2nd, Governor Ralph Shiver Northam, a graduate of Virginia Military Institute, one of the only institutions in this nation where the entire student body took arms against the Union forces, has pursued the unlawful course of conduct in a challenge to the lockdown orders and the evasion of the sheriff of the city of Alexandria in contempt of a court order to secure him under personal jurisdiction of the court of the Commonwealth, and an obstruction of justice against the laws of the United States, a felony punishable by fine and or up to 20 years in prison. He has been less than forthcoming to the people of Virginia, not even admitting these facts to his trusted fellow partisans in the Democratic Party, nor in repeated updates with regards to his COVID-19 response to a pandemic pathogen, has he seen it proper and prudent to reveal this distressing fact to members of the press. And his choice of flight from empirical truth by a physician only serves to impugn or impeach his own character and degrades the trust with which we can place the measures that he has proposed to address a novel coronavirus that has brought a great magnitude of loss, measured in both human lives that can never be recovered, in restrictions of our liberties and deprivation of our rights, which have yet to find redress, and in financial impacts that find us all in a compromised reliance upon the graces of his government to grant us relief. An unconscionable position. It is an empirical fact that he has chosen this reckless course in disregard for the laws that guide this commonwealth and our nation in the federal courts during the litigation that we commenced in June against the facial covering mandate. But there has been no cry from any of those who share his political party and ideology, nor sadly has there been any cry from political leaders in the opposite party to hold him accountable for his lawless actions. And I find myself yet again in the position of Ronald Reagan, who said of his former political party that he had never left the Democrat Party, but rather the Democrat Party had left him. And finding neither political party genuinely concerned about the laws of this nation, that I took an oath to protect and defend, in abandonment of their oaths to support and defend the Constitution and preserve our American way of life, those of us who still find pride in calling ourselves Americans, who choose the freedoms that it brings and cherish those, and celebrate its promise, are at once found in exile, strangers in a strange land, inimical to everything that we believe as Americans and share in common. As a candidate for governor, unlike Vice President Mike Pence, who has chosen to go along to get along by attending the inauguration of an elected president who can just as easily close his eyes to crimes, unconscionable, heinous crimes beyond a reasonable doubt that have occurred, and the denigration of rights and sufferance of irreparable injuries just across the river from the nation's capital, especially involving a military officer who for 2 decades has, in accordance with a solemn oath, dedicated himself in personal sacrifice to protect and defend that Constitution. As an American in his third generation since the abolition of slavery, and as the grandson of a martyr for the franchise right, I can, as a person of character and honor, not seek the nomination of either party. And am compelled, if I am to continue this course, to run as an independent candidate in a campaign for those American values that I had cherished for over 2 decades in uniformed service. And that is the course I shall pursue from here on out. But in the coming days, given the variant migration from the principled standards by many of our elected leaders and appointed leaders, very similar to the variant migration from an established clinical protocol that even the esteemed Dr. Fauci has embraced in addressing a pandemic pathogen, a novel coronavirus recently, finding him retreating from the opportunity to just simply explain in clear and empirically quantifiable terms the exact infectiousness of COVID-19. Rather than engaging in conclusory statements, we all must make a choice as to how we shall proceed forward, whom we shall serve. And I'm reminded of the words of one character in the great literary tradition of our former European past, said so long, long ago. Words spoken by the sagacious Polonius in the play about a vacillating prince of Denmark named Hamlet, who could not decide his own choices despite a grievous loss. When William Shakespeare wrote, "This, above all, to thine own self be true, and it must follow as the night the day. Thou canst not then be false to any man." As one Virginian reminded us once, now let us pray for ourselves that we may not lose the word concern out of our Christian vocabulary. Let us pray for our nation. Let us pray for those who have never known Jesus Christ and redeeming love, for moral forces everywhere, for our national leaders. Let prayer be our passion. Let prayer be our practice. My name is Major Mike Webb, and by God, I am running for governor of Virginia. I ask every Christian, every conservative, every liberal, every Republican, every Democrat, every Virginian, and every American to, like the motto of the infantry, follow me, and we shall overcome. Honest. And y'all come back. Yeah. This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb.